So I'm going to show you a really cool trick to compress your drums without using a compressor. So let's talk about why people compress drums in the first place. If you have a signal where the dynamic range is too much, meaning it's kind of jumping out in one spot and it's too quiet in another, you'll use a compressor to squeeze down those peak transients to make it so you can hear it throughout the song. Now, one of the main problems with compression is that it tends to soften whatever you put on it, or can add this weird movement or make things kind of pumpy sounding. Now, the other cool part about this trick I'm going to show you is that it doesn't really add a lot of movement to the source material. So if you want something to just be consistent, have more control, and then maybe even a little bit more space, this is the video for you. Now, if you need some free tools to help you do the stuff I show in this video, I have a link in the description that'll take you to my favorite free mixing and mastering plugins guide. I just updated it this year. I added a bunch more plugins. I think you're going to find it super valuable. There's even drum samples in there. All right, this song is by a band called Demoralize. It's called The Beginning. So these drums are live. I did add some samples to augment the sound, make it a little bit punchier. So here are the drums. Again, they're all real. Okay, let's talk about how to compress drums without a compressor. So the way we can do this is actually by not using a compressor, but instead using saturation. So saturation works by basically adding more frequency content and harmonic structure to the source content. And as a result of filling in the sonic spectrum with more harmonically related information, you end up increasing the overall level without increasing the peak height. So you're reducing your dynamic range without using a compressor. Here's one by Waves that I really like. It's the BB Tubes. They had a smaller version available for free on Black Friday called Little Tubes. That sounds really good too. So let me just show you what it sounds like. So snare sounds really punchy. Let's put this on. You'll notice the dynamic range isn't bouncing out of the speakers like it was doing without this plugin. And it's giving it more of an aggressive texture, which might help it cut through the mix a little bit, right? Sounds a little one-dimensional right now. And then with the saturation. So let's check it out in the mix. So it's a little bit too much for this track, right? We want a little bit more dynamic range in the snare to make it cut through that really dense chorus, but you get the idea, right? Snare sounds bigger than before. It sounds more controlled than before without losing any of the aggressive texture. Now, if you're working on something that is maybe not as aggressive and you want a little bit smoother control, what I recommend is checking out a tape saturation style plugin. Here's one by Waves that I just really like. It's called Kramer Tape, and it just seems to work. The texture of this saturation just seems to always work for rock songs for me. And this will give it a little bit smoother sound, not so much aggression, while also reducing the dynamic range and then keeping that snare drum nice in front without it poking out too much. Okay, so let me just show you. I'll turn this on. And then I'm going to pull this back. It's going to add in more and more saturation to the snare drum. But there's a point at which the snare drum starts sounding really flat. Okay, here we go. So right here. Okay, we're starting to lose the punch of the snare drum, but you can hear the room, right? The space that was captured on those tracks is starting to really come out. Let's listen as we go farther. Right, you're getting the ringing of the snare and you're getting a little bit more of that room ambience, and it's making the snare drum sound like it could be bigger if we weren't murdering it with this stupid plugin. All right, so let's back this off. Okay, a lot of nice punch. Okay, like right here is where we're starting to choke the snare, so we'd back it off. What this effectively is doing again is compressing the snare, but without a compressor. Pretty cool. Now, another technique that you can do is if you have a dry wet knob, you could be more aggressive with this. Okay, really saturate your snare drum and then adjust your dry wet knob to roll it way back so you're getting some of that unaltered snare drum signal coming through. And we can kind of simulate something like that just by duplicating this track. And let's just put this same compressor right on. So this works if you don't have a dry wet knob on your saturation plugin. And then we'll call this just top snare wet. And then we'll just abuse it. We're just going to crank this to 11, right? Maybe not that much, but like something in here, right? Now all you have to do is just adjust your fader, ride this new track up into your snare bus, and you will have control over the saturated room tone that you got without needing to use a compressor. And it has a different feel than a compressor. It's not so bouncy and it doesn't have so much movement. It's more controlled, restrained. Okay, so let's bring this volume up. So you hear when we have this thing maxed out, it's starting to add a lot of that space back into the mix. But at the same time, it's also making the snare feel a little bit more lifeless. So you have to find the right amount of dynamic range. So let's just adjust this quickly to find a sweet spot that makes this snare really shine. Okay, without it. So when we have this in, it sounds a little bit more controlled and a little bit bigger than it was before. Now you can also use this for toms, which I really, really like, especially if you're having trouble getting the toms to cut in a dense mix. But I would try to stay away from saturating your kick drums because of all the low energy content. Saturators and anything with a lot of bass tend to not play well together. They add a lot of texture that's really, really audible, and it's not always what you want in this genre. You can also do this very subtly on a vocal to also do the same thing, help thicken it out, kind of control it a little bit more, especially if there's a lot of stuff going on with the vocalist and you don't want to soften it using a compressor. Now, if I missed something in this video that you do, I'd love to hear about it in the description below, so drop me a comment. Don't forget about my free downloadable mixing and mastering plugins guide. I just updated that thing to put a bunch more saturation plugins in there. So if you don't really have a good plugin to use for this technique, there's probably one in that guide. I want to thank you so much for your time and attention today. My name is Bobby Balo. I'm the mixing and mastering engineer at Rayton Productions, and I'll see you in another video.